Want to thank you, Robert, for responding to my invitation, and I admire the work uh, that you have done, and I want to welcome you here today. And thank you very much for being with us.
No, Bill, thank you. And I really just appreciate you engaging me in this conversation. And what I love more than ever is that I get a chance to do it with you. So, and I just want to thank and commend you for your leadership and the work you do, and, and just your love and caring of this great city that you grew up in. So I'm happy to be here this afternoon with you and the others that are joining us as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much for those kind words. We did grow up in different parts of the city. You over in East Boston, and myself in Dorchester, of course, and 10 years apart probably. But our experiences in a lot of ways are the same, and we'll talk about some of those today. For the audience, if you could please talk about your background in terms of where you did come from in the city, and your education and people, your family, folks that influenced you, and so forth, and how you grew up. And as part of that answer, as you talk about your answer and you think about that question, how do these experiences that you had in your life growing up in East Boston and then in other parts of the city, how did they influence you in your career and your life going forward to what you wanted to do, and in your life going forward to where you are today? So take your time, and I don't know how many folks know about your background, but please, you could share that with us.
No, thank you, Bill. First and foremost, I'm the proud son of the late Annie Mae and Robert Lewis. My mom had me at 17 and my dad was 21 years old. I grew up in East Boston, and I'd like to describe myself as a public kid. I was born in a public hospital, grew up in public housing, went to public schools, took public transportation to get to schools, and then my life journey has been in public service. Went through school and, just had this great opportunity of, I'm an alum of the Boys and Girls Clubs from when I was a kid. Also the East Boston Social Center. I grew up in a community that was majority white. When I went to high school, we had about 1,500 students in my high school, and about 1,470 were white and 30 were, mostly Black. And at that time, you were either white, Black, or other. But I had a great upbringing where sports played a big role in my life, and sports was a lot around teaching me about teams and building and being part of community. And growing up in East Boston, the great thing was, you wanted to represent East Boston blue and gold, if it was on the football field or the baseball field or the basketball court. So life to me was good. I didn't know we were poor, just did not know that. We didn't have a lot, but my mom raised us with a lot of love and caring, but always this ability we could do more. My mom was fourth grade educated, and we had a few books in the house, but we had to read the books over and over and over, because her whole goal was that we needed to learn how to read. And a big part of my life, which got me to where I am today, Bill, is in 1976, an incident happened in my life where my family was firebombed. And one of my best friends threw a Molotov cocktail bomb, and I got firebombed at the age of 16. And when that happened, so much changed in my life. And what I realized is that this is during court-ordered busing, where I lived in East Boston, not being bused to East Boston. I lived there. And when this court-ordered busing happened, and we're talking about equity in education, that was really the big issue. It became so much about race, not just in East Boston, but race in South East Charleston, Hyde Park, and other parts of the city. And I became one of a few Black families in East Boston and Maverick that got firebombed out. And at 16 years old, during that time, Bill, is when I made a decision. For the rest of my life, I wanted to do work that was about bringing people together and convening people. and being outraged when incidents that are about divisiveness or hate would come to bear. So that incident in 1976 has helped to shape the rest of my life, even 46 years later, to who I am today. And it's just not coincidental that my career has been in communities with young folks about engaging, developing, and really being part of, I hope, the transformation of our city of Boston. So those experiences have, brought me to when I went on to college at UMass and then Curry College. Some of the work that I've done, I've been blessed that I've had the chance to speak about these issues on college campuses around the country and other community-based organizations and companies. So I'd like to say part of my work is also to be an ambassador of good, an ambassador of our young folks, but also about the opportunities and the possibilities that happen. So, so again, growing up in public housing has led me to public service, which I just love every single day in the work that I feel fortunate and privileged to do.
You mentioned court-ordered busing, of course, in 1975, 1976. And for the folks on the program today who may not be aware of what that was like here in the city, it was a difficult time, and a reputation that we really had a hard time. We've had a hard time losing. And I recommend a book, and maybe you agree with me, that if someone wanted to read about that time, I really thought that Common Ground,
Yes,
by Anthony Lewis, is really a great book to read about that time in the city. I don't know whether you agree with that, but that's one of the books that was written back then by Anthony Lewis, and I recommend that book. Since that time, have you seen the city change? And if so, or how? Have you seen it change?
yes, I've seen it change, and we still have a way to go. When I was young, and even during that time, our community was very segregated, and you also, and my mom and folks, we always worried about which communities we could go to and other communities supposedly not to go to. And I look at it today, when you look at communities like South Boston and Charlestown, they're totally different communities, right? You go to Carson Beach and you see the diversity of Carson Beach. And during that time, you did not see that, right? So you've seen this diversity in our city. You see, even like today with our political leadership, as well as the leadership in our nonprofit sector. But it took us a long time to get here, right? Our young folks can jump on the orange line, the red line, the blue line to travel across communities. But an interesting thing that was very interesting, Bill, even during the time of busing where, communities were segregated, what I always found interesting was that sports was a vehicle where kids were still crossing the city to compete and to play, right? So again, I just shared that for later, but that was a part of our city. But I feel like our city has to continue in this direction. Boston, I believe, should be a model, and we know we have a reputation on the national level, if it's people's perceptions or realities of what they think of Boston. So we're all responsible, all of us from all diverse sectors, to really play a role in showing that Boston should be and must be an engaged city for all, for everyone who's living here, all of our young folks. We all should have access and, and participate in this promise of this great city. But again, I've seen a significant change, but we also will have a lot of work that's ahead of us. And I do believe collectively, if we come together, we can write the script of what Boston is now and Boston's future should look like.
Well, I have a question later on about that, but my next question, or my next topic to talk about really is sort of a broad one. And as you look out at society, at the city, beyond, to quote one of my favorite songs, what's going on? Post George Floyd, post pandemic, generally speaking, what is your sense of the issues and challenges that you see today, that are in your sort of view as you think about your mission at the Boys and Girls Club and beyond, but how do you size up where we are today? I think, I think I hear you talk about some of the issues and you see some of the things going on with young people in the downtown crossing, some of the activities and the gun use and different stuff like that. And you say, is it getting better? And so what is your sense of today?
There's so much when I look at today, and I just feel we have this opportune moment with this generation, in particular, our young folks and teenagers, as teenagers are dropping out of programs at record numbers. There's a few things I'm concerned about. One is we have to educate and equip our young folks, that our young folks can have the skills and the tools to be productive in this 21st century economy. So we have to take a look at our education, our educational system. And are we actually preparing our young folks for the future, right? Or is it an archaic education system that, that was part of the past? And we know things that the mayor and the new superintendent are looking at. Our buildings need to be vibrant. Our buildings need to be learning. Our buildings need to be a place that are inspiring and exciting young folks to be part of this. We think of guns. Smith & Wesson is not located in Boston. Smith & Wesson is not located here, but we still have guns. But we have to think of ways of, one, how do we get guns, one, off the streets? But two, we need to really think about why are guns coming in to our communities? And how are we preventative on guns coming here? And what we have to do is replace guns, if it's not with books or it's with skills or with tools with these hands, to do more. I find that young folks are actually telling us a lot. They are telling us they're ready to be invested in. They're telling us they want to be skilled. They're telling us that they want to be part of our society. And with us not doing that, then what they find are things to do on their own, and not all of it is always positive. But I also want us to make sure we celebrate and recognize a lot of great things that are also happening in our communities as well, where a lot of our young folks are in school, finishing school, looking for careers and things. I actually think what we really need is we need a youth compact. We need our youth organizations to come together and create a youth compact collectively, that there is not a reason that every young person in this city should be able to participate in programs throughout our city. We have a depth of youth serving organizations. We have schools. We have parks and playgrounds. We have some of the greatest, higher ed institutions in the world. We have the business sector here. We need to think of collectively, what is it that we're investing in for the future of our young folks? But actually, Bill, to be honest, if we look at the future of our young folks and we look at them as a future talent pipeline, we need to invest in these young folks about what exists. I'm looking at your screen in the back and I see all of these downtown businesses. That's what we need to get our young folks ready, is for this next economy. But while we're doing that, let's making sure we're educating them. We got to make sure we're getting, the guns off the street. We need to make sure we're providing them with the access and the opportunities to know what is happening throughout our city. And if Boston likes to claim itself as the best, the leader, the innovator, the first, we need to add young people on that, on top of healthcare, on top of academics, on top of sports, on top of life sciences. We have this opportunity to invest in our young folks as our future and our future talent pipeline. That's where we need to go as we're moving forward.
I'm just going to jump ahead. And use a quote that goes along with what you say. You say that your new job at the Boys and Girls Club is one more way you can try to make Boston a leader in urban success, much in the way it is as a leader in life sciences and academics. What do you mean by that? And how do we go about that?
There's a few things, Bill, that resonates with me, and you hear this all the time. We have young folks that come to our colleges and universities from throughout the world. And what we're doing is, in a lot of ways, we're hoping to retain them in Boston. So all these students every year that come from elsewhere here, But we also have our young folks that are already here. They're already here. They're living in the neighborhoods like you and I would talk about. You're a Dorchester guy, I'm an East Boston kid. So we're here in the communities. What are we doing to invest in them? And again, academically, giving them the resources. How are we connecting our schools, to the industries that are vibrant and existing in our communities? And how are we investing in this workforce, our young folks, to do that? So this only happens if we actually start to combine our sectors. If we take the youth sector, our young folks, the communities, our schools, and we take with academia in the business, in the public sector, what's our strategy about making Boston the equivalent of how we feel about our higher ed and others? It's going to be a collective investment by the diverse sectors. I actually think we have this opportunity to do this now, because when I talk to our partners and supporters and sponsors and others in the business community, they all talk about wanting an educated and a skilled workforce. And what else do they say, Bill? And we want an educated, skilled, and diverse workforce. Folks, we don't have to go too far because it exists in Boston. You don't have to go too far because that's what we have in our 9 clubs throughout the city of Boston.
Yep.
So it is going to take our commitment of our sponsors, the business community, academia, and all of us to come together. And it might sound crazy, what would happen if we brought some of the greatest minds that we have together? And we've seen when we bring our great minds together, we can do things, and people around the world follow Boston. Why not make this commitment and figuring out what's going to happen with this in the next generation of young talent? Technology is taking us to a new place. Our young folks need to be on the forefront of that as we continue to move forward.
Well, I'm going to ask you a question about the role of the Boys and Girls Club in a second. And I will have a particular question that you've now sparked in me. But before I do that, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the BASE program. Just some folks may not know of it, a program that you founded in 2013 and left in March of this year. And you've touched on a little bit about it in terms of athletics, but it was a quote, a lifelong dream of yours, this kind of program. Could you talk with us a little bit about what the BASE program is? It still continues, it's grown, it's nationwide, but why sports? Why baseball? Why baseball? Interested enough, a sport that's losing interest, trying to get people into it. And could you tell us a little bit about that program for a few minutes?
Sure. To get to where you said, Bill, in 2013, I started the BASE, but in 1978, I was 18 years old, and I started a neighborhood baseball program in the Via Victoria community in the South End. And then over the next 2 years, I actually continued with baseball at the Cathedral Housing Projects, Tent City, and Castle Square. So I had 4 teams in public and subsidized housing of young Black and Latino kids and some white kids that were interested in baseball. So, I was 18 to 22 and I did that, and then made a decision that I loved coaching and wanted to build on this. And part of it to me was a lot around character development, teamwork, and, and also representing communities. And in 2012, while I was the vice president of the Boston Foundation produced a poverty report. And in that poverty report, Bill, it stated, in particular, if you are a young African-American or Latino boy, you were actually negative on every social determinant that got measured in that poverty report. So here I am, I had a baseball program, and it is also stating that, all of these young Black and brown boys are negative on the social determinants. So I realized in 2012, waited to 2013, I was going to lead the Boston Foundation in my role to start a program that was going to be about how do we leverage the power of sports with these young Black and Latino boys. How do we shift the narrative that how our young folks were successful on the field? How did I shift the narrative and say, if I apply the same approaches around practice, preparation, and performance on a field, if I can apply that in life, if I can apply that towards their education. So we use baseball as a sport, and it's a young person's passion point. They love the sport, so they were showing up. how did we flip that to provide access and opportunities to college, to visiting companies and businesses in Boston, to ensuring that they had access and exposure to things that were happening, and that we made sure that that was an additive to not just playing sports, but that you were going to need to participate in the life skills, the professional development, and others. And it just grew, and it became a model for other urban cities in the country, because there was this myth. Maybe professional baseball doesn't have as many African Americans playing, but there are young Black kids playing throughout the country. And the only difference why a lot of folks did not know that is because our youth sports has become now around funding, and it costs a lot of money to participate. So we use this as a vehicle to get kids into college, to get them internships, to get them jobs, but also how are we shifting the narrative and the paradigm that folks could see our young folks as a talent-driven entity, because we also knew a lot of companies and businesses also build teams. So the power of teams was important for us. And that was happening, and we did it in Indianapolis as well as Chicago and others. But it also led me to the work that I'm currently doing. How do we take the similar approach in building off the mass number of folks at the Boys and Girls Clubs, the dynamic facilities and everything that we have with throughout the whole city, to take the same approach around the services that we're offering. How do we build and enhance what we're doing? But again, a big part of this too is how do we take the character development, dynamic spaces, developing the leadership skills that our young folks at the Boys and Girls Clubs have? How do we look at academic life success, character, ready to work, and healthy development? And really, Bill, and I really mean this, building this next generation of leaders, and knowing at the clubs that we have thousands of our young folks, young men and women representing Boston and Chelsea, that is there. So that was part of the base to get to where it was, but then to take a place like the Boys and Girls Club tenfold and helping us to move that agenda forward as well.
And how did you see at the base, how did you see these Black and Latino boys, now the base includes girls, but as well, how did you see what you were trying to teach, demonstrate, whatever word you want to use? How did you see that manifested? What results did you see, and how would you describe them?
It's funny, because I'm that kid. So I'm that exact same kid that I was investing in. What I seen every day was talent, because even before I started the base in 2010, the base was the first inner city team in the country to win the United States Baseball Championship. And in 2013, it won the United States Baseball Championship. And in 2015, it won the United States Baseball Championship. So our kids could compete with anybody on the field. Today, we have a few kids that are in Major League Baseball, minor league baseball, managing, and in some of the top colleges in America. The only thing that our young folks needed was just access and opportunities. So when I look at them and I see them, and I say this really from the bottom of my heart, when we look at our young folks in our community, do we believe in them and really believe in their potential and possibilities? The great thing about these young folks and folks that if it was sports, design, music, whatever it was, they had a passion point. And if you're going to invest in them, develop them, put the time and energy in, what they can be is the United States baseball champion. Other than that, others see them as charity. Oh, these poor kids, or they're representing. Never. I never use deficit language, never look at our young folks as anything less than incredible leaders and talents. And that's what we have to invest in. I don't ever hear anyone talking about kids in Brookline, Belmont, Wellesley, or Weston as at risk or underserved or disadvantaged. Everyone's getting them ready for opportunities. And that's the same thing we have to look at our kids in Boston the same way. They are no different from the same access that the kids in the suburbs are getting or are receiving. And we have to do this, Bill, because our kids, when they finish high school or college, they don't have an older brother or sibling or a dad or somebody that they have that can make that phone call for them. So we have to get them ready and prepared. When they walk out of our facilities, they're prepared for what lies ahead in the work world, in families, and throughout their communities.
Well,
The question I really want to get to you, give you a chance to talk about the Boys and Girls Club, but I want to stop for a second. The point you just made about kids in other cities and towns, so wherever they may be. You said they get out of school and they have a brother, they have a parent, and they're actually, whether it's making a phone call or whether it's just showing them the way, showing them that what's available to them or what could be available to them. And so I want to just take out of my little outline a question out of order. And then I want to ask you to give you a chance to talk about the Boys and Girls Club.
Sure.
The importance of mentorship and leadership, mentoring young people, and then leaders who are there. I want to discuss those with you. Why are they important? How do we make people mentors? What about our institutions, our churches, our schools, our clubs, of course? How do you get young people to see the importance of a mentor? And then so just talk about why, because my point always is even a good kid who wants to do well, the question is, how do I do it? And he doesn't know about what's out there. And how would he if he didn't have someone saying to him or her, you could do that. You could do that. I'm struck, not to talk about politics, but I'm struck by the story of Andrea Campbell. And here's a young woman, grew up in Roxbury, had issues in her family, goes to Latin school, Boston Latin School, gets under the direction of some teachers, and ends up going to Princeton, UCLA Law School, a legal career, a family, lives in Mattapan now. I mean, to me, that's a wow. And she's a friend, so
Yeah.
truth be told. But how do we tell people, young people, these opportunities exist for you? So the whole mentor thing, would you just talk about that for a moment for me, Robert? Then I want you to talk about the Boys and Girls Club. It's not the old Boys and Girls Club we once knew, so, but I don't want to limit you on that. So just the mentorship, if you could, for a moment.
Yeah. So I appreciate you, Bill, sharing that example of Andrea. And, and you profiled her exactly right. What is so important is Andrea is not an exception, right? And that's just important for everyone to hear. She's not the exception. The thing that is important, and what we look at is when you're growing up is, the power of teachers, the power of coaches, the power, and I think when I was young, it was my Sunday school, teachers. At that time, no one ever used the word mentors, but they were the ones that loved and cared for you. They were there. They showed up. The thing about part of it for me is mentorship is being consistent, being there, really investing in the young person, for all the right reasons, not doing it because it just makes you feel good. I also have found that folks that have done well, that have come from the neighborhoods, how do you bring them back as folks that are spokespeople, getting them in front of young folks? There's something about the story, Bill. It wasn't coincidental that I said to you at the beginning that you grew up in Boston. It's important for me for folks to know Bill Kennedy, where he is, grew up in our neighborhoods, right? And we have to tell that story. We have to make sure we're also hiring our young folks from these communities in these roles in the nonprofit or in front of young folks. We have to ensure that we understand the power of coaching and the role that they play in a young person's life. But I actually think it's partly fundamental that we all have to play a role in paying it forward. As my late mom would say, it wasn't so much about the mentoring, it's about you're responsible to pay it forward. You're obligated to ensure that you're in service to others. And I just think that is so critical. So yes, if you do it in a formal way as part of an organization, that's great. But you can do it in informal ways like coaching, inviting young folks to your company to hear about the work you do, not to be afraid to stop someone on the street and ask, how are you? What are you up to? Tell me a little bit about yourself. I do have this one thing about mentoring, and I say this all the time to folks. Don't give a young person your business card and say, call me, and then don't answer the call, because that doesn't work. So mentoring is key and critical. And as you just shared the story about Andrea, and there's so many others, we need to make sure that our young folks see that there are folks that look like them, folks that have come from your neighborhood, folks that are still out there that have actually strived to achieve. Last thing I would say on this is your experiences, your failures, your setbacks are all part of this experience to still move ahead. We shouldn't allow that to determine your opportunity of success as someone's zip code or someone's socioeconomic status shouldn't. So there's incredible leaders throughout this city, incredible folks that are doing good work. And I guess the last thing I want to say is, even if you're not from the city and you care about our young folks, get out there and touch a life. And it is so important for us to do that. Bill, generations are relying on us to do this. And what I love, and I know you said leading to the Boys and Girls Club, I think if there's one of the things that excites me so much about our clubs is the number of staff and the number of staff who are alumni. A number of folks who have come up from the community, who came up through the clubs, that are now the staff, that are now leading our facilities, or the number of young folks we're hiring each summer. So, you know, when you think about our club, it's about us serving our young folks and really developing their character and skills to realize their full potential, and developing responsible citizens and leaders. And we do this through, you know, services and programs and resources. Prior to the pandemic, you know, we were serving upwards of over 5,000 members in the club, but also touching another, 7,000 families and young folks that were leveraging our clubs. You know, we also realize at the clubs, because we have 9 clubs throughout Boston and Chelsea. And I would say this for anyone who's visited, you know this, and you haven't visited, they're dynamic places filled with staff that are committed to the success of our young folks. And we do it through academic and life support, character and community building, healthy development, and getting our folks ready for this workforce. And I think the last thing I would say on top of that, Bill, I know you have a follow-up question, the power of place and the power of space and what we're doing. We have a dynamic board. We have an incredible staff that believe this, and we have some of the greatest supporters and funders in this city that are actually backing us up. Our big goal right now is, how do we build this model for the young folks who aren't participating in programs that we can serve even more? Because like I said, Boston's business community is going to be dependent on this workforce. And to be honest, Bill, I want people banging on our doors and looking for our talent as we're moving forward.
Well, and we're going to follow up on that. Before you mentioned, when I mentioned Andrea Campbell, that's because it's a current story, with the election. But one other person to show you another example of that, our newest member of the state Supreme Court here, Serge Georges, a friend of mine, and he came from Uplands Corner, St. Kevin's Parish, went to Boston College, high school. His father owned a cleaners, I think, and went to Boston College, Suffolk Law School, teaching now. And just another great story that he brings, this life experience he brings to the court in the judiciary. Just another example. As you said, there are others, and there's one that I'm recently most familiar with, because I happen to be on the JNC that nominated him to the governor. So there are these stories. We hear oftentimes more about the negative stories, stories, and not so much about the good stories. Okay, now we get into your current role.
Can I add one more piece?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
You're absolutely right, and that's when you were saying this earlier. This is why the power of, again, clubs citywide throughout our neighborhoods and the role that they play is not just a great story, and we need to tell of what's happening with our young folks in these clubs, which are phenomenal, but also because of the clubs and its proximity, the access and opportunities that they provide for communities, community groups to use our space, to be feeding folks during the pandemic, to provide vaccine clinics, where like our sites for voting registration and others. That is the power of our place and space and its impact on a broader community. Because sometimes it is important to see the impact on the young folks, but it's also important to see the impact that these clubs play throughout our neighborhoods and the diverse communities and sectors that make up the great communities of Boston and
So
Chelsea.
it is, so what was it? Is it this reach that you're talking about? What was it that made you say, I'm going to move on from the base, which you created, and that I'm going to become the Nicholas president and CEO of the Boys Club? What was the opportunity, the mission? What was it about it that said, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this? And I want to read a quote that I'd like you to meld into your response. It truly takes a village to create equal opportunity for urban youth. And I'm honored to join the Boys and Girls Club of Boston to empower even more kids, teens, and their families. So what was it? What is it really? Not just what was it? What is it about the Boys and Girls Club? I'm going to say, as another opportunity presented to you to continue your work and your mission going forward.
Some of it was selfish, to be honest, Bill, and because I'm a club kid. I'm a club alum. I was that kid from 10 to 18 that participated in the clubs, and I've seen the impact that it made in my life. And over the years, you know, we have partnered with the Boys and Girls Clubs for so many reasons. You know, a few things that inspired me is that they have clubs throughout the city in Chelsea. They're in neighborhoods, like mostly kids from almost every neighborhood of Boston and Chelsea are participating. The idea that we have this Youth Connect program, that we have social workers in police stations, like really working with young folks that may be involved or getting involved in the criminal justice system, but we can be on that front end and in some areas to push them on the straight and narrow. The idea that the Boys and Girls Club was serving thousands of young folks and families, to be honest, that excited me. You know, I realized that the impact that the clubs can make in being part of a community, but also helping to be part of leading and shifting the narrative of a community. You know, having a chance of knowing, honestly, Josh Kraft, and Josh was a dear, great friend, and had a chance to talk to Josh and, you know, pick his brain. You know, it was selfish and very exciting because also the role that the Boys and Girls Club is and the role it plays, it is one of the most incredible leaders of youth development, healthy youth development, if not just this city, but across the country. And on a very selfish end, I wanted to be part of that. You know, I wanted to be part of its mission, its leadership, and in its future. So it's surreal for me in a big way, Bill, to think of I was once that kid in the club that the mentors and folks were engaging and developing me. And I can turn around many years later and be in this position of helping to lead the club. So the club, I hope, will feel the work we're doing and investing in our young folks and believing with that in them and letting them know it's possible. I am that one of the examples that's what the club did for me to be where I am today. And there's thousands of others throughout our city in so many diverse sectors that the club played that role. And I wanted to be part of it now, but also wanted to be part of with my colleagues and teammates to be part of really driving it forward. I'd like to say, I want Boston to be a greater city because of us and with us. But that's a big part of our work as well.
But the scope of services from not the scope of services, but the scope of the offerings at the Boys and Girls Club, when you would go there as a kid, to what you offer today, I have a sense has dramatically changed.
Yes. And a lot of people perceive this as gym and swim.
Right.
And that was it. And listen, when I was a kid, I still say the best sports programs throughout the city came out of the clubs. But, you know, we're doing so much more around homework support, you know, our kids visiting colleges, work with literacy. We're doing a lot of leadership development in our our Torch Club that's working with kids 11 to 13 and our Keystone Club, but teaching kids leadership and service. This idea that we're providing healthy meals and healthy food and the power of sports and also still swimming and gym, but also how are we using this as a community convener? And one of the things that just, excites me even more is how are we developing skills and training and teaching the soft skills for our folks to be able to look at jobs. So, we're changing this narrative of like gym and swim to changing this narrative to being a leader and developing talent, training, mentoring, healthy food, and all of those things. And on top of that, to be real, Bill, we also happen to be in an innovative and creative economy here in our Commonwealth. We're going to be working hard that the Boys and Girls Clubs are going to be part of that innovative economy. And how are we looking at our clubs as innovation hubs and centers? And how do we look at technology and life sciences and others? And how do we take advantage of this great creative economy in the arts, in the music, in the entertainment? So we want to make sure it's not just about the services we provide, but the opportunity for folks to learn, to realize there's jobs and careers in these industries, and how are we going to move this forward? So the days of gym and swim, folks, are gone. The days of leadership development, healthy development, thriving change, that's the Boys and Girls Club that I'm joining, not that I'm bringing, that I'm joining to be part of moving that agenda forward.
I did see a clip on the news this morning about the Josh Kraft Boys and Girls Club, and they had a program. Was it yesterday? A young fellow, he's created a program, rapping or something. I saw he had a program yesterday, and Bob Kraft was there, and the kid's goal is to show other young people that work, doing what he's doing can be successful. It was a good clip.
We were there on Tuesday night. It's incredible because if you think of it, it's the Josh Kraft Mattapan Teen Center, and it was great to pay homage and honor to Josh, honestly,
Right.
And have his dad and others there. Like we had a diverse crowd of board members and trustees, business leaders, the police, public officials. But what I loved about that was to honor Josh. But our young folks were able to showcase the video that they did on Mattapan, that our young folks performed. And what it did is it brought a different light. And the media attention tells what you said earlier, the great things that are happening in our communities. And that on TV, you could see the power of our young folks, and not on TV to see Mattapan and thinking it's about a shooting. This is about the talent. And that night was great because I think it was another great night, not just for the Boys and Girls Club, the Josh Kraft Mattapan Teen Center. I think it was great for Mattapan and our city of Boston, because I think, again, it showcased, again, the best of Boston.
Well, thanks for expanding on that. I just saw it quickly. It was only a clip, but thanks for broadening that. Youth development, you use that term, and there's a concern, of course, about the impact of COVID-19 on young people, specifically their development after being isolated, not engaged in school, not engaged in their social activities. And I reached out to two friends, Kip Parker, who works for the Boys and Girls Club, and Becca Sawwasser, who works for Red Sox Foundation, and as you know, ran Scholar Athletes. And I asked them what do they think would be a question that I might ask you, and they both answered the same way, different words and so forth, but about youth development, They identified that. So, and recently, Mayor Wu appointed a Dr. Kevin Simon from Children's Hospital to be the head of a new position, to be the chief of behavioral health. In the article about his appointment, he said his mission is to develop a citywide strategy to address behavioral health issues, especially among youth. Dr. Simon says that youth, particularly Black and Latinos, were hit worse by COVID-19, were hit worse by COVID-19. And so I ask you, why do you think these kids are having a harder time than others? And what do you see in your role at the Boys and Girls Club? And what do you see the Boys and Girls Clubs doing to address this development among these young Black and Latino boys and girls who have been impacted. So I know I asked a couple of questions there, but you could think about that as to how you see with your mission in this issue coming together.
Bill, that's a big and great question. And we think and we go back to COVID and just like what COVID did and listen on a very personal level, the impact it affected it had on me and my life and my own family's life. So much was happening. You think of places, right? Places where our young folks had access to. Places were closing down. Schools were closed. A lot of youth-serving nonprofits were closed. This personal connection and affinities that our young folks have were gone. We have to remember all of our playgrounds, parks were closed. Our kids weren't able to go out. They weren't able to assimilate. They weren't able to compete. They weren't able to go to music programs. They weren't able to do the things that every young person deserves to do. And, some of my friends would say, yeah, my kids are using the garage or another room to study and to learn. A lot of our kids were living in apartments. They're not living in homes. A lot of our young folks are home with their young brothers and sisters trying to learn, do a remote learning with one computer or no computer. So all of a sudden, we were saying earlier, the power of a mentor, the power of a teacher, that was gone. All of a sudden, young folks were fending for themselves. And a lot of young folks, and I know before I started the Boys and Girls Club, we were seeing this with the base. A lot of our young folks were fending on their own. And here's the craziest part, in a weird way, they weren't prepared and didn't know what to do, how to do it moving forward. So I think it was like our young folks weren't getting the services we've seen. And it wasn't just COVID. There is this inequities and disparities in food distribution, in health, and so many other things. It came more to light because of the pandemic, and even some of the issues of race came to light because of George Floyd. Our young folks were looking for a place to go and people to meet and to lift them. And I just give thanks, not just to the Boys and Girls Club, to any youth serving organization, company, place of worship, or whatever, that were reaching out to communities, providing gift cards, providing access to technology and others. I actually believe the emotional, social, physical, and trauma well-being of our young folks will be something we're going to be addressing over the next 3 to 5 years plus. And there's things we have to do. One, we have to recognize that it's an issue and a concern of something we have to address. And we're fortunate to have Dr. Kevin Churchwell, Boston Children's Hospital, on our board, and talk to him about this. And he just laid the ground. This has to be something we're totally committed to moving forward. So what do we need to do? Part of it is, what we actually need to do is something I was saying earlier. We as a youth sector have to make sure, on top of the services we're providing, something that we did at the Boys and Girls Clubs, which I'm very proud of, not just our Youth Connect, but we made an addition during this year's budget to hire social workers that are actually going to be part of covering all of our clubs. We needed to make sure that there were social workers in our clubs, in our facilities, to ensure us being able to respond to our young folks around some of the emotional, social, behavioral, and trauma that they're addressing. So that's one of the big things we needed to do, on top of the training that we needed to make sure we were providing for our young folks, as well as for our staff around these issues. So we needed to make sure, one, we knew how to recognize and identify them, but to have the skills and the expertise in the clubs to address this. I think also, as we're looking to really move forward, I give credit to Boston Public Schools for the social workers and folks they have in the schools. But I think we have to come together and leverage the expertise. If Boston has some of the best in healthcare, hospitals, community health centers, throughout our city, but in the country. How are we in the youth sector in our schools actually leveraging that? How do we take, for us, Dr. Kevin Churchill, Dr. Charles Anderson, Dr. Thea James, Dr. Joel Betancourt, Kane Hayes, and all these folks that are in the industry, how do we bring them together? And something we are looking at, how do we invest in not just the programs we're running, but how do we take on health and wellness as a priority for us for the years to come? And for us to leverage the expertise that exists within our board and beyond to help us really think this through. We have to do something, because some of what we have seen in schools is we've seen a lot of issues around behavioral health. We've seen issues of violence. I mean, if you look at the last year, it was about year and a half. Bill, I can never remember the number of fights that were happening in parks and fields and ice skating rinks. You've seen it, hate and anger, racism, homophobia was just running rampant. We're all committed, and we have to do even more. So our folks in schools, our folks in the youth service field, and others need to be educated and actually trained and resourced on how do we address these issues as they're occurring, because they're not going away anytime soon.
What I'm hearing you say your last statement and also earlier is the need for some sort of summit of bringing together these stakeholders that you're talking about, identifying, I should say, employers, schools, medical providers, some sort of summit. That's the way I'll leave it. And maybe that's a role that the club can play to be the convener of this. But I see that's what I'm seeing. That's what I'm imagining, I should say, not seeing. I'm imagining that we need that kind of summit of the folks you're talking about to be at that table, sharing their expertise, insight, experience, whatever you want. So your strategy of that, I like that. One of my questions was how do you see these young people rebounding, I'll use a phrase, or catching up from the impacts? I don't know the answer to that, but they're going to have to hopefully catch up from whatever. And I saw a program today on TV about extra tutoring availability for young people, stuff like that to help them with their lessons.
And Bill, so a couple of things, and don't want to tip the cap too soon. That's one of the biggest things we're looking at. Our power of convening the diverse sectors, in both health and education and others. We have access to them. We have access. They're here in our city. They're outside my window. So our power of convening, but not just the convening, then coming up with a plan of action. And then what we really need is, this is then where the power of our business community comes in. It's about how are we investing in that change, right? And what I love about the business community, they know about investing long-term. This is what it's going to take. Bill, we have to catch up. And here's the problem. If we do everything we can today, we're still behind. So we're looking at things here at the clubs. We're going to extend. We're going to go back like 6 days a week. We're looking at how do we use our clubs during the morning, like, when kids are in school. Are there things that we can do in using the power of our clubs, during the day, on weekends? But we actually, in my colleagues that are listening, we're going to be bold. We're going to be tenacious on this. Our young folks are at stake. Generations are at stake right now. We only have the moment now to step up, to lead and be bold. If we're going to be the leader in life sciences, in health, in higher ed, we need to be the leader in our young folks. And I guess I would say that is the challenge or the opportunity I want to put out to everyone. We're in a moment of now, and we're in a city that is small enough and well-resourced enough to do it. So please jump on the bandwagon and let's do this together.
The question I ask, thank you for that. I'm going to go back to that in a second. But the question I ask a lot of folks in these webinars during the pandemic has been about hope. Hope. Do they have hope for the future? What is their sense of hope? What it is based on? And earlier this month, I have a couple of examples. About 2 weeks ago, actually, President Obama gave a speech at HubSpot's conference in Boston. And the host of the conference, Brian Halligan of HubSpot, asked him about a line from his speech at the Democratic Convention in Boston in 2004, when he said there is no red and blue states, but one United States. He then asked him, what do you, President Obama, think of that remark now? Obama answered, we are more divided now than we were then. He then says this, regarding my question of hope, Robert, regarding my question of hope, the president then said, hopefulness is not a blind optimism. It's people fighting and struggling and overcoming great odds in order to make the world a little bit better. He then said, it was a description of the world as we'd like to see it. It was aspirational.
Yes.
As you think about hope, what is your sense of hope? What do you think, if you could comment, on President Obama's concept in that speech two Fridays ago here at the convention center about how he views hope?
You know, it's so funny. If I wish I could point everybody, like I'm looking up right on, my bookshelf, I have 3 words: belief, love, and hope. Like it's a belief in what's possible. It's about loving our young folks and community enough and providing access and opportunities. So I am hopeful. I'm optimistic. I'm looking at some of the change that's happening in Boston. What gives me even more hope is when I look at our young folks and I know that they're determined to be successful. They're determined for a future. And one of my greatest hopes is, Bill, I want to develop a generation of leaders here in Boston that can afford to live here, stay here, and be the leaders of the next generation. So I said this, I am saying it's a call of action for all of us. And why not Boston be this leader in shifting and showing other cities in America what is possible when we collectively come together? I believe in our private sector. I believe in our public sector. I believe in our communities. I believe in our young folks. Why not here in our city of Boston? That's what gives me the fire. That's what gives me the energy. And that's what gives me the hope for us to move forward.
Thank you for that. You had talked about COVID and so forth. And as you think about, it was public, about what you went through with COVID, how has that, if it has, how has that impacted your approach, impacted the way that you approach your work, approach your life, priorities? So, and having gone through a difficult time with it, now you thank God you're in good health, and so this just to end, how has that impacted you going forward with your life and with your work?
No, thank you, Bill. It's a tough time. On March 22nd, my birthday, I turned 60, and I went into the hospital and not feeling well and thinking I was going to get a prescription and sent home. Little did I know that I would be on a ventilator for 12 days fighting for my life, and then being, in therapy, physical and occupational therapy, like learning how to re-walk and so many other things. What happened during that time honestly gave me the will to live. And I'll just say that honestly, the will to live. And what I've realized is that, whatever blessings that I got to survive, when 75 to 80% of folks during that early period of time that were actually on ventilators were dying. Throughout the world, were dying. I lived. And I believe part of that was because my work isn't done. And so every day I wake up and I see what's good in our community. It's giving me energy. The idea during the pandemic, the racial reckoning that was happening, I had made this determination similar to with busing when I got firebombed many years ago. We all have a responsibility to do more And I feel like, again, as I've recovered and as I got stronger and emotionally and physically stronger, there's so much work still to be done. And what COVID did for me is I believe invigorated me to do more, while also learning how to appreciate life and people and others even more than I think I did prior to that. So I'm energized, I'm ready, and I listen, and I appreciate and cherish every moment and every day that we have. And let's go. I guess that's how I end it. Let's go.
Thank you for sharing that with us, and we're just so glad that you're well and where you are. We've covered a lot of ground today. You know, if there's anything else that you'd like to say to the audience as we say goodbye, but I just want to thank you for your kindness and friendship to me and to my family, who you know, and I wish you well, and as you continue now with your leadership of the Boys and Girls Club, I just have a sense these places are needed now more than ever. So if there's anything else that you want to say to the audience as we end, but again, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. And Robert, the last word is yours, but thank you very much.
Bill, I want to just thank you. Like I said as I started, thank you for your leadership, what you do. These conversations are so important. You know, it's going to take our collective action to do this. I am blessed and happy to be at the Boys and Girls Club. I'd say come join us, or if there's opportunities to join you, let us know this. But you know, there's a generation that's waiting for us to lead them, and let's do it together and let's show what is the best of Boston. So thank you, and everyone, enjoy the rest of your day. And we got work to do. Looking forward to being a partner with you on this journey.
Well, thank you, Robert. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. And thanks for the folks here at Nutter for supporting these webinars. Thank you all. Bye, Robert.